Hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 2 of our Overshadowed series, discussing how modern IT and security teams are dealing with the risks of shadow IT. I'm Russ Spitler, CEO and co-founder of Nudge Security, and with me today is Dave Anderson, virtual CISO and principal consultant at TSC Security. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, how's it going?
Great to have you here today. Thanks for talking with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So today we'll be talking about the risk that should be avoidable, and that's really about incomplete IT offboarding. You know, what we've seen is this explosion of employee-led SaaS applications, and tasks that should be simple, like IT offboarding, just aren't anymore. And this introduces a lot of risks and challenges for businesses of all shapes and sizes. You know, kind of gone are the days when we assume that all of our apps are in a single sign-on system. We could just flip a switch and, smile as somebody walks out the door. The reality is as people kind of work, they introduce a lot of new technologies. So, Dave, in your role, you work with a variety of companies, a variety of IT and security maturity. When you start working with a company, how do you get an understanding of the technology stack, especially now that so much of it is SaaS delivered?
Yeah, generally it ends up being mostly interviews with the IT leaders and the IT teams to kind of understand like what sort of applications that they have that everybody's using, what applications that the engineering teams might be using, and so on and so forth. And with that, I mean, there's always things that are being used that unfortunately the teams don't know about. And the more people you talk to, like, oh yeah, there's that tool here, or that tool there, and there's this other kind of marketing tool that the marketing team is using that has all the information about all the prospects and everything else that is could be construed as sensitive data, and whatnot. So it's kind of crazy how like there's so many different SaaS applications and whatnot that are being used that IT isn't even aware of, and it's not secured. It's not in single sign-on. And when people are offboarding, they still have accounts.
It's amazing today. I always think of it as kind of a mesh of applications because it's like a Rube Goldberg machine for sure. It's like you sign into an app, hey, I can link this into all my other apps, and all of a sudden you're clicking through OAuth grants, and like you just have this giant mesh of things. And the beauty of it is most often they're a great business productivity gain, right? Like, I
Hmm.
can solve, things that used to take me weeks to get insight into in a few seconds with all this new technology. But when you think about that employee interview process and you kind of think about sort of the security programs that are out there, what are the blind spots that you most often see when kind of managing user lifecycle and deprovisioning access?
Basically, everything that's not in single sign-on. There's like that's really when it comes down to if and that's even assuming like a company's using single sign-on. I mean, I have a few clients they're like 25-person startups, and they may be using Google and using like Google's OAuth and whatnot for single sign-on, but they have still a myriad of apps that are literally just using username and password, and that's unless you have like a good inventory of those apps, it's impossible to know like who has accounts where.
It's amazing based on the work that we've done with our customers. You're doing a great job if you have 30% of your apps in single sign-on, which is probably the inverse of what most people think their posture is.
Yeah, yeah, that's been my experience too. And one of the big challenges, especially for like smaller companies, is that if you're using a SAML-based single sign-on, like a one login or an Okta or whatnot, that you sometimes have to get the enterprise version of many of these SaaS applications in order to be able to even be able to use SAML-based single sign-on, which is just insane. Unfortunately, like, a lot of companies just are really that I think they're doing their customers a disservice by not allowing them to integrate with even if it's just like a Google OAuth or something like that to provide that sort of level of security and not having to have a just username and password.
To me, that's like selling a burger and charging extra for the bun, right? Like single sign-on makes it usable. It's really hard to eat a
Yeah,
burger without a piece of bread around it.
yeah.
Um, anyways, the interesting data point that we recently gathered is we just did a survey of 375 IT pros about employee offboarding, deprovisioning access. And what we saw that was a little bit surprising, but kind of in retrospect, perhaps expected, was that 70% of the respondents said that they've experienced business disruption, security incidents, unauthorized access as a result of incomplete offboarding. How does that resonate with what you've seen out there in the field and your experience?
It aligns 100%. Of like, unfortunately, just unless you have that inventory of applications and you know who has access to what, some people leave if you have a reduction in force or anything like that. There's all these dangling accounts out there, and one of the challenges that like many of the companies that I've worked with and worked at, uh, when you're offboarding, even if it's just a single employee or a large number of employees, the IT team's going to have a checklist. They're going to have the most critical apps, like your single, whatever you're using for single sign-on, uh, maybe like a Dropbox or a box, any place where like data, like sensitive data could be stored. And then they're going to have a whole list of the other apps that they know about that they then actually have to go through and make sure that they cut access to, like developer tools and marketing tools and so on and so forth that may not have been in single sign-on or didn't have that available because they had to pay the tax. So the IT team is stuck having to basically cut everything, cut the important stuff, and then maybe go through and like over time, like over the course of a week or something like that, spend all that time because it's a very manual effort to go in and actually disable all these other accounts.
I mean, disabling access is one piece, but the other thing that I've seen out there in the field is you disable a user's account and all of a sudden some business automation breaks because they had created the connection between like GitHub and Sneak or something along those lines.
Yeah,
And
we had
that
that.
that just mesh just continues to grow.
Yeah, we had a interesting situation that a couple of places that I've worked actually where we use Slack will have created a Slack bot, and like that was pretty heavily used by a lot of people in the company. The person who actually created that Slack bot or integrated it in left, their Slack account was disabled, and suddenly the bot went away.
Right.
Just the, so it's just, and it was like and stuff that's just like hugely important to people, like a Salesforce integration or I forget exactly what they all were, but there was a bunch of those where like it was like suddenly this integration that we've been depending upon that feeds us data on a constant basis just poof went away because a person's account was disabled.
And in some ways that's the beauty of where we are today is like I don't need to reach out to IT in order to get two services working together. Like there
Hmm.
doesn't need to be some in-house dev team gluing APIs together with a bunch of Python. Like it works, which is awesome, but it's also a challenge because now it's each individual employee who ultimately is sort of attributed that access, and keeping track of that is a huge challenge. So one really interesting piece that came around that survey, which was, while 70% of people experience incidents from incomplete offboarding, we saw 80% of those same users express confidence that their IT offboarding process was good. So where do you think that sort of disconnect comes from? Like, if I think I have a good process, I probably shouldn't be experiencing incidents at that rate. So where do you think that challenge is?
It is primarily just around the things you don't know that you don't know. There's all these various applications that have customer data or other company data that just the IT team's not aware of. And yeah, I mean, there's a possibility that let's say the marketing team, they know like, okay, when someone leaves, we go through and we like cut off these accounts and these systems that the marketing team knows about, the IT doesn't know about. And because maybe the head of marketing is like paying for it off the credit card, or not to pick on marketing. I mean, it happens across the whole company. Like engineering's probably one of the bigger, one of the bigger offenders with all the different kind of like SaaS tooling out there, especially for um, doing things like automation, as you were talking about before.
Yeah, that CI/CD pipeline has so many little dangling apps off of it these days that
Oh yeah.
I don't think you can blame marketing for the SaaS sprawl anymore. I think fingers are squarely back in the other direction at this point in time.
Definitely, definitely.
Um, so so when we think about sort of the how IT teams are balancing the need to ensure the complete offboarding with sort of the reality and the time and energy to do that, how do you think they're achieving that balance, right? You talked about sort of that huge tail of manual efforts versus sort of like the immediate need. What do you sort of see when you're working with clients, and how do you advise people to kind of help work through that?
Well, I mean, nowadays, I mean, there's tools like Nudge that you can plug in that will actually kind of crawl the environment and find out where all of these like the long tail is. I mean, it's hard to actually even know about necessarily what all the different applications are out there. So the it's unfortunate that it just there's a lot of manual effort in and doing these offboardings. Like I said before, you could like cut SSO, and if like these apps are behind SSO, then you're at least cutting access, but not removing licenses that you're paying for, or transferring the data to the people who need to have it after the person leaves. It's just it's it's extremely tough on the IT teams and extremely scary for the security teams, knowing that all this data and system access is just dangling out there.
It's an area we're really excited about, and we've got some exciting automations coming through there that I think will be a game changer for a lot of people who are responsible for this. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. When you think about the advice you have for IT and security teams looking to improve their ability to manage this sort of SaaS first world, what are some of the basic building blocks that you encourage people to start to think about, and the steps that you encourage them to take?
Number one is an inventory. You have to know what you have, what applications are out there, even if it's only being used by one or two people, and even if it's not being managed by IT. IT needs to know about it, and the security team needs to know about it as well, so that they make sure that they know what data is there, who has access. Maybe not even ideally having an inventory of who has access to these particular apps. But unfortunately, with that, without some sort of automation in place, it's really difficult to keep track of that. But having in the inventory of the applications, I mean, there's a reason it's on the critical security controls. It's like the number one or two, systems inventory and application inventory.
I only smile at that because every company's got an inventory. They probably have more than one inventory, and it's
Yeah,
probably in a dusty spreadsheet that hasn't been touched in a while, right?
yeah.
Um, and I think that's sort of the dynamism of this like SaaS first employee led adoption world, where we see again in our customer base, upwards. One organization was adopting 90 new SaaS applications every month. And if you think about that, like that's a whole new application getting introduced in your environment every 8 hours. Like
Hmm.
it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
And along those same lines, the other stat that we saw was for 1,000-person organization, there's a new SaaS account every 20 minutes. So like keeping track of who has access to what is something that only happens with automation these days.
Hmm.
Because if you're relying on a spreadsheet, you're already out of
Yeah.
date by the time you hit save. Um,
Exactly.
well, we could go on about this topic for hours, but it's time for us to wrap up today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And Dave, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Pleasure to talk with you. Stay tuned for future episodes of Overshadowed, and hope you all can join us again soon.